Good morning, everybody. I think what we'll start with is introductions for our panelists, as well as maybe you can tell us a little bit about your business, the vision, the mandate, and we'll start with you, Jean-Claude, please.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And I cannot see anyone, but so I am Jean-Claude Piedboeuf, Vice President, Corporate Strategy Innovation and CFO at the Canadian Space Agency. So the Canadian Space Agency's mandate is to develop the space for the benefit of Canadians. And Canada has been in space for a long time. We were the third country with a satellite. And so we continue to basically to lead the space development in Canada for the benefit of Canadians, both from an exploration and from Earth observation and technology development. So there is exciting business these days. We are hearing about space almost every day now. So it's exciting time.
Thank you. Scott?
These lights are really bright, I gotta tell you. When you're sitting on that side, you see the darkness, but this is like really bright. I'm Scott Brass. I'm the founder, CEO of a company called Eagle Flight Network. We're Indigenous-owned ground stations as a service company in Canada, and our vision is to, since there's 3,000 plus Indigenous communities in Canada, is to access these lands to put this critical infrastructure that Canada needs across Canada from coast to coast to coast to connect the global space industry, basically. And that's our vision. And I'll be around later to talk and meet you guys and introduce myself and hear your stories as well, because I'm interested in everybody that's here. Like, this is the International Economic Forum of Canada, or the world. This is really, I'm honored to be here to say.
Wonderful, thank you. That's great. Stéphane?
So I'm Stéphane Germain. I'm the CEO of a company called GHGSat. At GHGSat, we use our own satellites to monitor greenhouse gas emissions from industrial facilities around the world. So we have 9 satellites in orbit right now that are monitoring facilities from oil and gas, waste management, mining, and very soon we're also going to be adding a satellite that can monitor carbon dioxide emissions from steel mills, aluminum plants, cement plants. So basically the largest industrial sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And we do that so that at the end of the day, we can help operators and governments better understand, control, and reduce their emissions. So last year alone, we mitigated over 2 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions of greenhouse gases. So that's like taking 500,000 cars off the road for a year. And we did that working with our partners in every part of the world. And so that's our goal, our vision, is to keep doing that, accelerate that, reduce more greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, working with operators and governments.
Great, thank you. I think you can also be a really interesting panelists here this morning, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I think each of you have a really unique perspective to the industry, and I hope you all enjoy the conversation as much as I'm looking forward to it. So we're here to talk about economic competitiveness. I'm going to start with you. And so we know that the industry itself yields economic benefits, job creation. Can you tell us about Canada's overall contribution in terms of the economy and the growth of the sector?
And thanks for the question. And GHGSat is a good example of innovative technology that is coming from space, and with space you can monitor. So there is a lot of data that you can get only from space, especially on the climate change. But in terms of the economy, and I have some number here, in 2021, the space sector generated 4.9 billion in revenue, and it's very export driven. So it's basically exporting to the world. And we have a state of the space sector that we publish every year that you can access on our CSA website. But for example, the space sector contribute 2.8 billion to the Canadian GDP in 2021. And the private sector in Canada, they are investing in R&D. Space is typically you are reaching for the start, but you are going at place where it's difficult. The conditions are difficult, so it's very R&D intensive, more than the space manufacturing in general. And CSA is supporting this development, so this is something we do, and the return on investment is very good, so 2.2 on every dollar. And the space manufacturing segment, the intensity of the work is 18 times what is going on in the manufacturing sector in Canada. So this is really a sector where we have the productivity is increasing and where we are investing. So the business expenditure have been increasing from 376 million in 2019 to 547 million in 2021. So a significant increase. And in terms of people, it's around 24,000 FTE that are involved in space, and it's still growing. Like the space, like worldwide, is going to triple the space economy. So there is a strong potential for Canada in terms of revenue and export driven.
That's great. I'd love to get your numbers from you. I didn't mean get his number. I didn't mean it that way. Can you, Stéphane, elaborate a bit as well in terms of the economic competitiveness in the market and how Canada is feeling and sitting?
Sure, and I think I can speak primarily to the new wave of space companies and commercialization of space that's been happening in the last 10 to 20 years. So in the space business, there's been traditionally very large players building hundreds of millions or billion-dollar satellite or space infrastructure, space stations, and that's why it had to be led by governments in the past because there's such enormous investments. But with the miniaturization of technology, especially in the 2000s, 2010s, we've gotten to a point where you can make an entrepreneurial investment in a relatively small platform, so something the size of a microwave oven, for example, in the case of our satellites, and you can do something useful with it. So now you can put a really powerful sensor on a very small platform, put it into space, which is a unique vantage point to see the whole planet every day, and now create new types of information, new types of data that customers can use for all kinds of things. So if anybody used Google Maps today or checked traffic on Google Maps, some of that is driven by data that's provided by cell phones and other users on the ground, but some of that is generated from satellite data. GPS is another favorite example, which is kind of related to Google Maps again. But what we're doing is an example of the new type of commercialization, putting new sensors into space, providing data on greenhouse gas emissions everywhere in the world that people can now factor into their business decisions as companies. You can decide what your carbon footprint is, how you should be changing your carbon footprint and measuring that directly anywhere in the world. And ultimately, even for consumers, you can turn that into something that consumers can make decisions on a day-to-day basis about the carbon content of the things that they're buying or the life cycle impact or life cycle cost of the cars that they're buying, for example. So that new space, that commercialization of space by entrepreneurs is really driving a whole new growth path in the space industry, and I think is opening opportunities both in space but also on the ground to use that data and use the information generated to open up whole new industry. So it's a really exciting time to be in the space business, and I personally think that the services we can offer from space will be more and more useful on the ground and drive the competitiveness of the industry and the Canadian industry on the global scene.
Jean-Claude, are you seeing the same with commercialization and the partners that the CSA are using?
Yes, and Stéphane is right. There is two types of project, as Stéphane mentioned. There is the large project where the government is the main funder, and like Canada now recognize and since a long time, but in the latest strategic space, in the latest space strategy from the government, the space is recognized. It's an infrastructure, and we are investing in that. So we have the specific project, and I will mention a few during the talk. But so we are investing in big project, but we are also investing in supporting the space sector in the smaller project, in R&D, in developing also the what is critical is the workforce of tomorrow. You need to develop that. You need to work with the university, the college to build this workforce. This is becoming something that hurdle the growth of the space sector. And so we are also supporting that. For example, a project that we launched a few years ago, and which is I found very interesting, is the CubeSat project, where we issue a grant for 15 CubeSat across Canada. So every provinces and territory have been building a CubeSat, including the 3 territory, and we have been launching that, and the last batch has been launched recently. And this have been involving hundreds of students from engineering, science, communication, project management, that will be the workforce of tomorrow. And some of these students already started. Some of they have the idea to start a small company, as Stéphane mentioned, because the cost is much smaller at this point. So this is and so we support that. We support also the big project, but I will talk a bit about that later.
I would like to explore the conversation about workforce and the talent pipeline in a few minutes, but I'd like to ask Scott to introduce his business. When we first met, I was really taken by your business and your passion in it. I'd love for you to share that with the audience as well, please.
Okay. Again, Scott Brass, founder, CEO of Eagle Flight Network. And the way I got into the space industry, because I'm relatively new to the space industry, but the way I got into the space industry was basically a disagreement with Roger's cell phone data. They were overcharging me, and I thought, there has to be a better way for mobility, because basically Rogers, Telus, Bell, they're all the same. And if you're Rogers, Telus, Bell representatives here, I'm sorry. But anyway, I started looking into what Elon Musk was doing at the time, Starlink, and he had something called low Earth orbit satellites. So I was really interested in that, and I started looking at his business model, where he was operating in the world. He was just getting going at that time, and I noticed that Canada didn't have any infrastructure to support his low Earth orbit satellites. So one night, I sent him an email, and next morning he emailed me back and said, "I'm very interested in Canada. What can you do for me?" So me and my daughter at that time, and I wasn't paying her, she developed this map of Canada, and she put all the Indigenous communities on the map. And I looked at that map the next morning, and I knew we had something special here, because it blanketed coast to coast to coast. And I knew that the Indigenous communities, they don't have a lot of economic development, but this is the way that we could bring economic development to them. We could also bridge the digital divide, because everybody talks about bridging the digital divide, but nobody really has any solutions to bridge the digital divide. So we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're putting infrastructure in an area to service the global space industry. And then with that infrastructure there, we can build other infrastructure to service the bridging the digital divide. So after countless of meetings with Elon and his team, we came to Y in the road. We went one way, he went the other way, because with Elon, if you've ever met him or talked with him, he sees everything the Elon way. He goes his way. It's his way or the highway. We went the other way because we know our value. We know what we have. So I started working with Telesat. Within 24 hours, Telesat, I pitched them this idea, and they were very interested in it. And they've been early adopters to this dream, and they've worked with us, and we've worked our way up into, the letter of intent, MOU, MSA, and whatnot. And then because of Telesat's promoting of us to, now we're working with MDA. We're starting to explore working with Kalian, Hawaii Pacific Teleport. There's that company in Ecuador, I can't remember what they are, but they're at the 0 degrees. So we call that 0 to 65, because we're working with Natural Resources Canada now on a plan to put some Eagle Flight Network antennas up in Inuvik. So 0 to 65, we call that program. It's very exciting. I've made contacts basically with all the other global service providers for the stations, and I'm making deals with them. So now, I think at last count, we're over, that Eagle Flight Network will have access to over 120 ground stations globally now, and I've done this all pre-revenue. So that's basically my story. That's why I'm here. I'm excited to take this to the next step, and if you guys know anybody that can give us money, that would be great.
That's great. That's an excellent story. Thank you for sharing that. Stéphane, I'm going to just switch back to the conversation we were having about workforce and pipeline development, partnerships with the universities. Can you tell us about your perspective and what your business is doing and to ensure that you have that pipeline of talent?
So, as Jean-Claude was saying, it's extremely important for us to train the next generation, work with the next generation to make sure that we have the talent we need as we grow. In addition to that, we really work at the cutting edge of technology in spectroscopy, in the way that we measure greenhouse gases. And Canada and Quebec really has tremendous expertise in spectroscopy. In fact, some of it born out of the Canadian Space Agency over the years. And for that, it's really important for us to team with various universities to advance that technology. So, for example, for us in Canada right now, the spectrometer technology that we developed was actually developed in partnership with the University of Waterloo, probably about 10 years ago. The satellites that we built were built by the University of Toronto Space Flight Lab. This is an entity in Canada which really is a jewel that is globally has a fantastic reputation for building very high quality small satellites for businesses like us, but also for governments and other institutions. We work with ground station operators, so sorry, not yet the Eagle Flight Network, but for a company called Secor out of Memorial University of Newfoundland. And then we also work with several other universities. For example, we've got an AI project right now for development of automated interpretation of the imagery we bring back with Polytechnique here in Montreal. We work with UQAM in Montreal for looking at emissions from hydroelectric power stations. So we really, this network, and that's just in Canada, we work with international institutions and universities as well to really advance the science behind the instruments and ultimately the data we provide to our customers. So all of that's really important. And by the way, just one last little shout out, the CubeSat project. So that just generates tremendous enthusiasm at the university level. My niece was in Cape Canaveral last week participating in the Western University launch of their CubeSat. The team of 6 of them went down. And that's the kind of life experience that they keep forever, right? They're going to remember this, and it's going to drive their careers going forward as that kind of event that really marks the progression in their professional career. So anyways, that was fantastic.
Great. That's great to hear that connection. Your international partnerships, how did those get started?
A lot of hard work.
Yes.
Some of it is deliberate, some of it's by necessity.
Yeah.
So in the world of greenhouse gas monitoring from space, the Europeans in particular are very strong. The US also, but a little less so. So we started very early in a partnership with the European Space Agency and a group in the Netherlands, the Netherlands Institute for Space Research, which is what's called the principal investigator, or the lead scientists on a mission launched by the European Space Agency for looking at greenhouse gases. So that's one group. The other one is that we've worked very closely with is Harvard and also with Stanford. Harvard has an atmospheric science group, which is really world-class. And we've sponsored PhD students through a program that those students then helped us by developing new intellectual property that we use every day in our measurements today. And we continue a great collaboration with them. And Stanford is, they have a particular group of people who really focus on validating the measurements from space. So when you take measurement from space, you need to have a kind of a ground truth to validate that what you're measuring actually is what you emitted on the ground. So they have a group that does what are called blind trials, so that they don't tell us how much they're emitting. They don't even tell us where they are exactly. And they say, okay, let's see if your instrument works. Target generally in this area and tell us what you see. And then slowly they lift the veil. They tell us, okay, how much what was the wind speed, where was it, and they allow us to iterate our measurements to see if we can get better and better. And Stanford are really world-class experts in that and have allowed us to validate our system to a point now where all of our customers no longer question any of the performance of the systems. They take it for granted because of these blind validations that the technology is completely de-risked and it works at face value.
That's excellent. Scott, I want to talk a little bit more about the Indigenous communities, the role of the Indigenous communities. Did they receive your business? How did they, were they accepting? Did they want to participate right away?
Well, first off, I don't speak for the Indigenous communities.
yeah.
I speak for Scott Brass and Eagle
Yes,
Flight
exactly,
Network, but
yeah.
this is my interaction with my people. At first, they were hesitant because I think my people have always been delivered promises that have never been, acted upon or delivered. So with an Indigenous person coming to an Indigenous community with this idea and, we're going to create revenue, we're going to help change your fabric of life, it was met with hesitation. There were some groups that were very interested in it right away because it's economic development. Economic development will lead to housing, health, finance, education, all those great things, all those basic needs of life will follow that. So meeting with them at first was hesitation, a lot of them, but I do have enough that I can start this project with the ones that are interested in, and seeing is believing, right? They'll see what's going on at Joe's house over here. They're going to want the same thing, right? So the tide is slowly changing because of social media too, because I'm very active on social media, updating what we're doing and our success and who we're working with. So seeing is believing. And I'm slowly turning that corner where I used to have to go out and message them or phone them or email them. They're starting to message me now. So I'm in that position where this is starting to, I'm lighting that match for the fire to spread. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, but.
That's all right. That's great. And how did the partnership with Ecuador start?
With,
Ecuador, you mentioned that you were working with
Ecuador.
Is that your daughter researching?
Well, I was online one night, again, LinkedIn, late one night, and I saw the CEO, and I'm connected with him on LinkedIn, but I saw he was online, and I sent him a message, and because of communications nowadays, people message you back right away. It's way more effective than sending out an email and waiting 2 weeks for a reply. Eh? You're online, answer me. So I sent him a message, and within minutes, he messaged me back, and he said, because I told him, I said, let's explore the possibilities of working together, and let's share customers. Let's send each other customers. Let's broaden the business. I can expand your market if you expand our market. We're Indigenous, you're Indigenous, let's work together. And he replied right away. So I have a meeting with them and their team shortly as well.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. I wanted to shift a little bit to Canada's role in the supply chain. As you know, Brampton is home to MDA, which we're extremely proud of. And because they are building their new headquarters and their new center of excellence in Brampton, my team and I are looking at the Canadian supply chain and how can we attract businesses to our city or other cities. Can you speak a little bit about Canada's supply chain and what the needs might be or where the strengths are right now?
That's an interesting question. There is the industry is across Canada, and there is the large industry like MDA, Honeywell that have been involved in space for a long time. We have a strong university support, but there is small company emerging across Canada, and the goal is really to even if I'm looking to MDA. Recently, we announced the Canadarm 3, that is the large arm that will be on a space station around the moon. So basically, it's the successor of Canadarm that was on the space shuttle, and Canadarm 2 that is still on the space station. And by building that with MDA, we are using a mechanism that is called industrial technology benefit that makes sure that we can redistribute also a part of the benefit to a larger basically supplier chain across Canada. The space program in Canada is really, it's from a Canadian Space Agency perspective, is to provide services or to do exploration of space, but using Canadian space technology. So we really want, when we develop something, we are aiming to have the best technology, to have the best science, but with the space sector, the Canadian space sector. So we will not just buy, we will have not buy a Canadarm from outside of Canada or a RadarSat constellation from outside of Canada. We really focused on developing the space sector, both in industry and in university and the large space sector. But more and more, we are focusing also on the SME because Canada is a country of small and medium enterprise. There is a lot of startup, and this is the sector we need to focus. And so we have some exciting program that are coming up, and type of CubeSat, but addressing the space sector. I'm a strong believer that we, as Stéphane said, that we can do a lot of good business, good science with smaller system. We have the large system like the space station, James Webb Space Telescope that is giving amazing data. But we can also develop both for exploration, smaller and faster and cheaper, but especially also in terms of Earth observation, communication, like connecting people, getting data from space. So, and that will develop a space sector, a supplier chain, and by doing that, it will grow the export market also, because space is a global business.
Absolutely. Are you seeing a lot of shifts in the supply chain for your business?
I think in space, you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of what's developed, which is really niche.
Yes.
You don't really have large production runs with stable long-term supply chain. That being said, there are specific niches where we do have, as Canada, really good strengths. So we talked about optics earlier, and we use those optics capabilities and spectrometers that we use on our satellites. But the optics capabilities around Quebec City in particular and around Montreal really are world-class. There are also computers, so what are called onboard processors, these computers are really specialized to be able to tolerate the temperature variations and the radiation environments and the really nasty environments of space. And so we have experts in that in Montreal, MDA, who do really high-end computers. And then there's a small company in Montreal called Xiphos, which does computers that are now on just hundreds and hundreds of satellites worldwide, really specialized in that. As I keep going west, I think of Honeywell, what we used to be called ComDev, who have microwave components that are in, I think the number is over 95% of every telecommunications satellite ever built from any country, had microwave components from this company in Cambridge, in Ontario. So there are little pockets of supply chain excellence in Canada that really contribute to the global supply chain. But it is still pretty niche because it is a highly specialized industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of the supply chain conversation?
The supply chain, I think the space industry, especially here in Canada, is just starting to get going. Yes, there is a small niche of established companies like GHGSat, the Canadian Space Agency that governs the flow of the industry. But for companies like me, Eagle Flight Network, I think there's opportunity in supply chain disruption. You know, I think that the supply chain is it was in trouble a couple of years ago with COVID and all that stuff, but I think we're out of it. And like I said, the space industry is just starting to take off. So if you have any ideas or vision, passion for the space industry, please get into it because it's very rewarding. It's very lucrative with a lot of the contracts that I see handing out. Yeah, the supply chain is just one aspect of the space industry, and too bad that it affects everything when it goes down.
And I think
Maybe I can just add to that, because the one thing I didn't say about supply chain, which I think is really important, is what you're doing. Because ground stations, and maybe just a quick 101 on how satellites work, for Earth observation in particular, so satellites that monitor the Earth, most of them are what's called a polar orbit. So they go over the North Pole and then over the South Pole every day. Every 98 minutes, the satellite does an orbit. And if you think about that, that means there's a big advantage to having the receiving station for getting all that data down from the satellite at a northern latitude, so as high up as you can get. And it just so happens we have a lot of that in Canada, right? So Inuvik, of all places, has become a hotspot globally of ground stations. And so we have 2 ground stations there, not ours personally, but we hire services from others. And one of the major differentiators is because there's a fiber backhaul that goes up the Mackenzie River Delta all the way up to Inuvik. But if there are clearly other opportunities for other ground stations across Canada, because Inuvik's getting a little crowded. So, for example, we have another ground station in Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador. But in other northern latitudes, in Indigenous communities, to me, that seems like a great business model, a great business opportunity, where Canada clearly has a geographic advantage that we can exploit for the world.
Yeah, for sure. Orbital advantage, geographical advantage, second largest landmass in the world. Come on, let's use it.
yeah, absolutely.
3 natural assets.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity, it's a trendy word, but it's also extremely meaningful. What does it mean for the sector? Can I start with you?
This is, I would say, preoccupation more and more. This is something we talk weekly, if not daily. Space is the technology we develop in space, as Stéphane mentioned. They are state of the art, and they can be used for like peaceful use, but they can be used also for other use. So it's a critical technology that is used more and more. We can see with the war in Ukraine that commercial satellites are used now to provide like military data. The communication are provided through a commercial system. And the advantage of a country, of Canada, depend of its capacity also to be at the leading edge. And if we are losing our technology edge, if our IP is not well protected, we are at risk from an economic perspective. And this is a very serious thing. And CSA, we are addressing that through our own protection, like in our system, but also talking with the industry, with the university. I think industry in general is aware of that. In university, we are in a more open science mode. But it's very important when we invest fund in Canada to develop the science and the technology, that the benefit of these investments are coming back to Canadian. And for that, we need to be aware of these cybersecurity menace on the space sector. There was an experience done by ESA recently, hacking a satellite. This is something that can be done now. So it's a lot of computer. And so how you protect that? How you protect the data that are in space? How you protect your space asset? If we depend on the GPS, we depend on the telecommunication. If these systems are hacked and you are losing the GPS, you are losing the communication, this will be a major trouble for Canada and for the world. So we need to protect that. We are working like quantum computing, quantum communication. This is something, we have a project on that will make communication more secure. But this is something we are addressing. The space security is becoming an issue. Debris in space it's not cyber security, but it's affecting also the security of our space asset. So it's big, very important topics.
Did you want to add? You were nodding a lot.
Oh yeah. Cybersecurity is our number one corporate risk, period. And I was at an event last night put on by Investissement Québec, so Quebec institution that provides funding for a lot of growing companies in Quebec. And I was gathering about 50 portfolio company CEOs for Investissement Québec, and everybody agreed the number one corporate risk is cybersecurity. It is, as you know, just give a few examples of how it can affect. You know, if you can hack a satellite in orbit, you know, you can certainly hack servers. You can hack in the cloud. You can get hacked in many different ways, and really, it's a constant challenge that we have to adapt to on a regular basis. It's not something you can hit a certain certification and assume you're okay. It's an evolving challenge, and it's our number one corporate risk. Period.
That's a scary answer, right? Seriously, that scared me a bit.
Reality. Yeah.
If you can hack a satellite, that's just think about that. Not you guys, but just think about that for a minute. Did you want to add anything about in terms of security with your work, cybersecurity?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I like him.
It's his number one corporate risk.
It's not this one. No. Certainly for the rest of us, I think it is, no matter the sector, really. Switching topics for a minute about diversity in the sector, from a talent perspective, a gender perspective, a cultural diversity perspective. Are you seeing a shift in the last few years about it being less male-dominated sector, more women and other cultures being a part of the industry now? Start with you.
I would say yes and yes. And this is very important for the Space Agency, for the Government of Canada, the diversity. We really aim to have a workforce at the Space Agency, but also in the space sector, ideally, that is representative of the diversity of the Canadian. We found that by working with the diversity, you get more creativity, you get different solutions to the problem, and this is very important. We want to work more with Indigenous community. There is a target. We would like at some point to be able to give 5% of space contract to Indigenous owned company, because we think it's important. Like the CubeSat, when we started the CubeSat, there was a specific desire to have the Northern Territory involved and to have the Indigenous community involved in the CubeSat. And so we are seeing a difference. In terms of women at the Space Agency now, we have been doing efforts in the last 20 years, and we see a difference. So there is still work to do, but we are getting there. But there is some room to improve our ways, and so this is it's a permanent, but it's a very important to get this diversity, and we are include that now in our contract, in our grant and contribution. This is part of what we are asking the space sector to do also.
That's great. You were mentioning to me you started your career at MDA.
That's right.
Have you seen a shift from when you were at MDA to now? Can you share that with us?
It's been a huge shift, right? So I started my career as an engineer, and in engineering at the time, the ratio was maybe 20% female. Unfortunately, I think today, I won't say how many years later, but a lot later, it's up to 30%, I think. So it's better, but I said, unfortunately, we've got a lot of work to do, right? That's just not acceptable. At the end of the day, you as Jean-Claude said, you want your workforce to represent the diversity of our population, and you really want to have diversity in every respect. So at my company, I would say it's the same challenge. It's we have diversity, but not as much as I'd like, and as much as we need, I think, is a more important point. This is because diversity brings different ideas and different perspectives, different styles of negotiations and interaction, which are really important. There's business value to that. And we have to interact, for example, with countries all over the world. We sell data everywhere in the world, on every continent right now. And I'll just share one experience with you that happened to me in Dubai in November last year, where I was with my colleague, Lola, who is from Nigeria. And I showed up at a stand for a Central Asian oil and gas operator where we wanted to sell them monitoring of their services. And the CEO of the company looked at me and said, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to her because she'll understand me.
Oh,
And it's experiences like that make you realize that you have to have that diversity to have people be able to communicate and relate and understand each other more directly without always want to talk to the white guy. Right? From my perspective.
I didn't say that.
So anyway, it's that's one little example for you. But more generally, diversity is extremely important. We need to do a better job.
Yeah. So I know in Ontario, the international certification has been a challenge. They've just opened it up for professional engineers trained internationally can now work in Ontario. Is it the same thing in Quebec? Are there restrictions for foreign trained engineers or doctors, for example, but in this conversation, engineers?
Are there restrictions? I wouldn't say there
Okay.
restrictions is a harsh word.
Yeah, yeah.
There's certainly roadblocks, right? It's harder, I think, to bring a diverse population in through some more challenging programs. And also, when it comes to employment, there's challenges with regards to things like security clearances that can also slow down all the efforts we're making towards diversity. So there are institutional roadblocks in place for sure that we need to keep working on.
Interesting. Scott, is there anything I haven't asked the panel that you wanted me to ask so that you could share more about your business and your thoughts?
Well, diversity, going back to diversity. Diversity in my culture, the indigenous culture, is we are a matriarch culture. So the women decide everything, really. and then the men, hear the women, and then they go out and they hunt or whatever they have to do physically, move that coach, whatever. But diversity, it's a word that's used a lot.
Yes.
But it's just starting to be enacted within the business world, the business working world, and diversity means visible minority. It means it applies to women. It applies to gender neutral people. Like the word is taking on a bigger meaning for everybody, and we have to be aware of that. And I think diversity is what makes the economy go around, because businesses are attracted to when you use the word diversity and green, clean. These are the same words that are used in that in the same sentence almost. But yeah, diversity. The women have the power in my culture, anyway.
Not in mine.
Not in mine.
So that's interesting in terms of ESGs and the environmentalism and governance structures when it comes to your comments with diversity. So just to share for a minute, so Brampton has over 250 cultures speaking 170 languages. So for us, we don't even really use the term diversity because that's just who we are. And so we have businesses from Nigeria, the largest Nigerian diaspora in the country. So for us, it's just, that's our way. And that's kind of how we behave. Those are the businesses we deal with. So when we go abroad or even other provinces in the country, we're actually uncomfortable in some ways, right? Because I am the minority in Brampton. It's fascinating to hear your experiences as well. So we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to make sure that we touched upon the things that we have spoken about. When you and I spoke, I guess it was last week, it was entrepreneurship, commercialization. Is there any last words you want to share on those topics?
I just want to share my enthusiasm for it, where I think Canada's position is in space and the space industry, space market right now. I think certainly the market is growing worldwide. I think Canada has a unique position to participate in it. I think we have the skills, the high-end talent and the technology that we built up over decades of investment to take an active role in the space industry, and I think we have a fantastic opportunity to see. So I'm obviously very enthusiastic as a participant, but I think for anybody if there's ever been an interest in getting into the space business, now's the time to do it. It's a tremendous opportunity for anybody who's got the energy and courage to give it a go.
Energy and the courage. That's great. Jean-Claude, for you?
Yeah, the space. I'm also an enthusiast about space. There is the space economy is growing. We depend on space more and more. Like there was a good example in Earth observation and communication. Space exploration is growing. Space exploration was, I would say, the reserve territory of government for a long time. Now we are talking of commercial space station. The human space flight now is led by a commercial actor, so you can buy something, and this is growing. On the lunar exploration, this will be becoming an economy in itself in a few years. There is not only the government that are investing in the lunar exploration, but the commercial space sector is very interested. NASA has been doing some partnership with the commercial entity, and in Canada we are participating into that. So I was talking to a few weeks ago to a space mining sector so basically interested in doing mining on the moon. This is a new area. So the space economy, both in Earth orbit and in beyond Earth orbit, is going to grow. There is opportunity for Canada. Obviously, Canada is a big country. We have a lot of capacity, and we have a large landmass. So. As Stéphane, if you're interested in space, it's the time to go.
Scott, any last words from you?
Yeah, the space industry, like I was saying earlier, it's just starting to develop, take off. It's starting to become commercialized, which is good for entrepreneurs like myself. But Canada does have the three natural resources. It has the land, it has the space, and it has the spectrum. And data, everything runs through spectrum. So data transfer, data storage, data analysis, we can make Canada a global leader in services for sure.
That's great. Jean-Claude, thank you. Scott, thank you. Stéphane, thank you. I think they'll stay back for a few minutes before lunch. Someone was going to tell us about lunch. If you have any questions, we'll end now. But thank you for your contributions and the great discussion. And if anybody has any questions, we can stay back for a few minutes for them to answer your questions personally. And that's the lunch information, I think. Thank you very much.